I am speaking today with my friend Maestro Stanley Sperber, one of Israel's preeminent conductors. Stanley served as music director of the Haifa Symphony Orchestra from 1985 to 2000. He has also guest conducted orchestras around the world, including all of Israel's major orchestras. A prominent expert in choral music and conducting, Stanley Sperber has served as the music director of the Tel Aviv Philharmonic Choir, the Israel National Choir, Rinat, and the Jerusalem Academy Chamber Choir. A native of New York and a graduate of the Juilliard School of Music, Stanley immigrated to Israel in 1972. He is also an internationally certified tennis chair umpire and has represented Israel in major competitions, including the Davis Cup and the U.S. Open. And Maestro Sperber was also the founding conductor of the Zamir Chorale in New York in 1960, an elite ensemble specializing in musics from Jewish traditions. And on a personal note, he is my mentor who encouraged me to start the Zamir Chorale of Boston in 1969. Welcome, Stanley. Good to be talking to you.
Great. It's great to see you, Josh, and to be talking to you.
So, Stanley, let's talk about when you started the Zamir Chorale. What inspired you? What were your goals? Was it a Zionistic thing?
Well, no, not exactly. I was a graduate of the Mossad camps in Pennsylvania, where so many of us young people from the East Coast went. And we had a counsel's choir there that was conducted by Yonatan Zak, international pianist who unfortunately passed away a year or so ago. And we had such a great time with him. We decided when we got back to New York that we would continue singing. And even though we were all quite young, I was in fact just 18 years old, I had a little more experience than them. And we were just about 12 people. And so I started waving my hands in front of them. And sure enough, as the time went by, it turned out that there was a need for young Jewish students to express themselves culturally in Jewish things. And so we established this choir and sang exclusively in Hebrew. And then, of course, a few years later, I met my buddy Josh Jacobson and encouraged him to do the same in Boston. And to my great happy joy, he did so successfully to this very day. And of course, you'd have been congratulated for that, Josh.
Thank you. And a similar experience when I came out of the Camp Yavna, where you were the music counselor and you started the choir, and a bunch of us went back to Boston and decided to do the same thing. Repertoire. Where did you find repertoire and what kind of music was it?
Well, what happened was that a couple of years earlier, or around the same time, actually, I visited Israel as a tourist. And since I had conducted in the Zimriya, Israel's International Choral Festival in '67, I got to know Gary Bertini, who was the director of the Rinat Choir, and he invited me to a Rinat rehearsal and even invited me to conduct Rossi's Hallelujah there as a kid. And I met Gil Aldema, the famous Israeli arranger and composer, actually. And I started to get my music from Rinat. And in subsequent visits to Israel, I picked up as much material as I could. And there you go. I mean, then I started to get to know repertoire that was written worldwide in Hebrew. I was involved in the initial publishing of the complete works of Solomon Rossi, who you know so well and who you performed very much. And so I performed a good deal of Solomon Rossi with the Zamir Chorale. And also I got to know works like the Sacred Service by Ernst Bloch And so gradually, we compiled a rather large amount of Hebrew repertoire, which kept growing all the time with my visits to Israel.
So, but let's go back to 1960 when you first started the choir. I mean, what kind of repertoire? And I know there were a number of pieces that were classical repertoire that were retexted into Hebrew.
And so the repertoire in the beginning was 2 and 3 part stuff because, I mean, we were just in the beginning stages. And in fact, I think our first concert was at Brandeis University, where we sang a concert commemorating Israel Independence Day. In the concert, we were we were invited to sing some songs at a small amphitheater outdoors, and we did so, and it was a rather small stage, and I had the choir on stage, and I had to back up a little bit so I wouldn't be on top of them, and I had my feet more than halfway on stage, but the heels of my shoes were off the stage, but I was balanced okay. But I heard a woman in the first row, an elderly woman, said, "He's going to fall off the stage." She said it quietly, and then she said it più forte, and then she couldn't handle it anymore, and she got up and ran up to the stage and grabbed me around my knees and asked for help. And so she stopped the concert. And when we continued after the concert, a man came over to me and introduced himself as a professor at Brandeis in the music department. And he said to me that he liked the chorus, but he wanted to ask me a question. Why was I conducting with my left hand in my pocket? So I told him I really had no experience conducting, and it was then actually I decided that the time had come to begin studying.
How about some other memorable concerts? I know you took the choir to Israel in 1967, and that was rather memorable in many ways. It was right after the war.
It was, because what happened was that about a few months before that, I was conducting a rehearsal in the Jewish Theological Seminary where we worked at 122nd Street and Broadway. And I saw an elderly man walk into the room and sit in a chair in the back. And in the intermission, he came over to me and said, "My name is Aaron Sfipropis, and I am the director of the Zimriya. I would like you to bring the choir to Israel in '67 to represent the United States in the Zimriya." And we got very excited. We got together the money for the flight because they paid the expenses in Israel, but the flight was covered by us. And we took around 30 singers or so to Israel. But 1 week or two before the flight, the Six-Day War broke out. And
Unlike this war, it was much shorter, though.
it was a little shorter by about a year and a half.
Yeah.
And when the war broke out and everyone was actually getting ready for the trip, the singers were calling me and saying to me, "What's new with the war?" As if I was a member of the army. And so I would tell them that I sent a few tanks up north to Syria, and I had a couple of planes down south, but stop asking me what's going on with the war. And then I called Aaron Sfipropis, and he told me the war is over. I said, "Is the Zimriya going to take place?" He said, "Sure." And so it was amazing. We flew over there, and we landed just a few weeks after the end of the war. And the choir wound up singing the first concert ever at the Wailing Wall while they were still actually clearing the area in front of the wall. And then we sang the first concert ever at Har Sofim, Mount Scopus, in the background, they were blowing up mines. And so it was an unbelievably exciting trip. And if that weren't enough, on the bus ride from the airport to our hostel where we stayed, and a soldier asked, a woman soldier asked us to give her a lift to Tel Aviv. And on the way to Tel Aviv, she taught us Yerushalayim Shel Zahav.
Whoa.
Yeah, and we sang it already in a concert 2 nights later, the beginning in unison, and then we did some improvised harmonies of it. And so the trip was unbelievably dramatic for us and resulted in quite a few people making Aliyah. To my chagrin, two of them didn't come back with us. One of them joined the army, and one of them got engaged to a paratrooper. And I asked them, "Did you tell your family about this?" They told me yes. Nonetheless, when we landed at Kennedy Airport, their parents were there, and they said to me, "Where's my kid?" And I said, "Well, didn't they call you?" They said, "Yes, they called, but I didn't agree that they didn't come home." I said, "Well, they told me they did." I said, "We want our child back." I said, "I'm sorry, I can't do anything. One is engaged, and the other one's in the army." And then when we went back in 1970, I had to have every one of the singers sign have their parents sign that I was not responsible to bring them home.
So you started the choir in 1960. You called it Zamir. Were you aware that there had been earlier Hazamir choirs in Europe
Well,
in
to be
the early
honest, Josh,
20th
the
century?
name of the choir in the beginning was the Mossad Choral Group. Since,
Mhm.
as I told you, we started in Camp Mossad.
Yeah.
And then the director of the camp, Shlomo Schulzinger, of blessed memory, contacted me and said, "You may not use the name Mossad anymore in case somebody gets injured on the way to rehearsal. I might get sued." So uh, I started looking for a name, and Moshe Avital, who was one of the counselors, and he became a director, a camp director. Wasn't he our director in Yavne, Josh?
Yes, he was. Yes.
Okay. He suggested the name Zamir, and it was a beautiful word because it was a play on the word les Zamer, to sing, and also it was, of course, the word means nightingale. And so we 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 immediately established it. I did not know at the time that the original Zamir Chorale was established in Lodz, and actually you were the expert who did the historical investigation about it. But I will tell you that uh, I think it's also in the book, but it's quite interesting that in the very first concert we gave in Israel, an elderly woman came over to me and said, uh, "You established the Zamir Chorale in New York. I sang in the Zamir Chorale in Lodz,
Mm.
in Warsaw." And she said to me, "You got to come to my house. I want to show you something." I said, "No problem." And she said, "No, you're coming right now." After the concert, I came to her house. She showed me a newspaper clipping with her and her husband singing in the choir, and the conductor's name was Baruch Sperber. And she was a bit shocked and freaked, and so was I, since Baruch Sperber was murdered by the Nazis in the same year that I was born. And she was convinced that I was what's the word? A
Incarnation.
reincarnation,
Yeah.
as
Twilight Zone.
as as Samuel Barber said, of Baruch Sperber, and I mean it's an unbelievable story that I had the honor of continuing his original choir in Lodz without even knowing about it.
All right. So you moved to Israel in the early 70s. What was your
Yes.
motivation?
Well, what happened was in 1970, when we came to the Zimriya a second time, we were invited to sing with the Israel Philharmonic in Beethoven's Ninth. And my gang learned the whole piece by memory. Because I mean, it was singing with the Philharmonic and with Zubin Mehta. And Zubin, and there was Israeli choirs there as well. Zubin was saying to the Israelis, "What's the matter with you people? The American kids are watching me all the time, and you guys are in the music." And he was complaining all the time. One of the choirs was the Philharmonic Choir, and Ruth Zohar, who was the manager, contacted me when I got back to the States, and she said, "Look, we're not really very much appreciated here. Would you come and direct us?" So we made an agreement that I would come direct them in 1971. And just before I was coming to Israel, I got a call from her saying, "I'm sorry, but Zubin Mehta asked me to delay your appointment because it turns out that Joe Friedlander was the conductor of the Philharmonic Choir, and he was a close friend of Zubin's. And Zubin decided to give him another year to improve the choir, And so I had to go back and try to get rehired by my choirs, which I did successfully with Zamir, but not with a couple of the other ones. And then the following year, I was invited a second time to conduct the Philharmonic Choir when I really never had a first time.
Well, you must have had some challenges making this transition, language, cultural, with any resistance from the singers that you had, and later the players in the orchestra.
Well, actually, since I was brought up in an Orthodox home and I was a student for 17 years at the Yeshiva of Flatbush, I spoke Hebrew. So when I came to Israel, I just had to learn how to curse. Uh, uh,
Right,
actually,
the technical language.
yeah, yeah. And of course, I the interesting thing is I never was able to develop an Israeli accent. You have a much better one than I do, but even yours is not perfect. And I would have thought that with my musical ear, it would work that I would be able to say resh, but I couldn't. And so, for example, when my son was born and my wife asked me what I thought we should do for a name, I said, any name that you want, just without a resh. So we called him Noam.
That works.
That worked, yeah. But
You,
as far as getting uh, assimilated, shall we say, into the culture, that really was not much of a problem. Since I already was conducting the Philharmonic Choir from the very first day, and my wife to be was the accompanist, uh, Ricky, who you know. Unfortunately, she passed away in '87. Uh, uh, and most of my acquaintances and my friends were Israeli, and very soon thereafter, I started conducting the Rinat Choir as well, and then the Academy Choir, and so I had no time not to assimilate into Israeli culture. I was totally involved, rehearsing virtually every night of the week.
Now, in your book, Between the Lines, available from Amazon,
Thank
you
you.
tell some stories of some very interesting guest conductors and soloists that you've worked with. What stands out? Give us some samples. You
Wow.
might even sell the book.
Yeah, what stands out? Oh my Lord, so many stories. There was Eliyahu Baal, the Israeli conductor who was supposed to conduct Elijah in 1979, and 2 weeks before that, the manager of the Israel of the Jerusalem Symphony contacted me and asked me if I would replace him because they were having a contractual debate in Baal at the last minute. Uh, Actually, this is not even in the book, so this is this is
A
just
bonus.
this is a premiere. Ball apparently demanded a couple more plane tickets, and so Fickler, the manager, refused and asked me if I would conduct it. And I had the great fortune of conducting with Benjamin Luxon, who I believe was the greatest Elijah of the 20th century. So yeah, that was quite an experience. I prepared the Cottage Symphony for Bernstein, and he I mean, it was such a privilege to work with him because I also got to prepare a whole bunch of other stuff with him, including Beethoven's Choral Fantasy and and other pieces. And I did get to know him even on a Lenny Stanley basis, which was great. I'll jump for 1 minute um, to a music festival in Germany where I took the Renat Choir, and Lenny was conducting in the same festival at the same time in a different location, Haydn's Creation. And so afterwards, I went over, and he didn't know I was there. I was with the Renat Choir, and he said, "Stanley, what are you doing here?" And I said, "I, I'm conducting Renat Choir." And he was signing autographs, and he opened up my jacket and signed his name all across my shirt. But in that first project that I prepared for him, the Cottage Symphony, he came in. Lenny had a couple of, shall we say, problems. One of them was he drank a bit, and he came into the rehearsal a bit soused. I could smell it on his breath, and he came in with a blank score of Kaddish, and apparently he had not seen it in a while. And he started with the last movement, which, as you know, is very tricky. It jumps around from 4/3 to 3/4 to 5/8 to all that stuff. And he started conducting, and he got lost. And he started again, and he got lost again. And he said to the choirs, "We're going to take a break. I want to see Stanley in the next room." I went into the next room with him, and he says to me, "How the hell do you conduct this movement?" And I said, "Lenny, you wrote this. You wrote the piece." He said, "I know I wrote the piece, but I'm stuck." I said to him, "Okay." He said, "Let's go." So I said, the 7/8, I do 2, 2, and 3, and the 9, 16. He said, "Wait a minute, let me write this down." And he took a pencil, and there I am teaching Lenny Bernstein how to conduct the Cottage Symphony. 3 days later, he conducted the whole piece by memory with the Philharmonic Orchestra. But that was an incredible first meeting with the great Bernstein.
So you made a switch from choral conducting to orchestral conducting. Obviously, you've done many
Well,
pieces
not
with both
really,
choir and
because,
orchestra.
my first 13 years, I was conducting 3 choirs: the Jerusalem Academy Choir, Renowned Choir, and the Philharmonic Choir. And I was guest conducting
Right.
the Jerusalem Symphony. And only in '85 was I offered the music directorship of the Haifa Orchestra. So, and then I concentrated 15 years with orchestral conducting, both in Haifa and also guest conducting in other places in Europe and in the United States.
What was that transition like from being primarily a choral person to primarily orchestral, doing many works without chorus?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because it was, for me, quite traumatic. Not so much in the technical sense, but I had been working all my life with choirs, and who better than you know how fired up a choir can get, a non-professional one especially. They look forward to so much to the rehearsals, and they give everything they can, and they're so excited by the music. And then gradually, as I advanced in my career and I was working with more and more professional groups, such as the Haifa Orchestra, I was stunned to see that these people really didn't like music that much, because for reasons that were easily understandable. They were being paid a paltry sum, and they had to go from the rehearsal to a second job. Some of them were working in pizza parlors. Some of them were cleaning homes. And then they would go home and have dinner and come back to play a concert. And the following morning, they showed up again to rehearsal. So it was no wonder that they were bitter, because, having studied so many years in their instrument, finding themselves in the 3rd or 4th stand of the second violin section and earning a very, very small sum, they were not overjoyed to be there. And for me, it was a shock to be working with people who were not as excited about making music as I had experienced my whole professional life until then. So that was a tough adjustment to make. As far as the conducting was concerned, since I had been doing a good deal of orchestral conducting, especially in my very first year, I'm sure you remember the tragic case when Istvan Kertész drowned in the beginning of a series of concerts with the Haydn Lord Nelson Mass, and I had prepared it for him. So I got to conduct Israel Philharmonic already in 1973, and after that happened, the other orchestras invited me to guest conduct the Israel Chamber Orchestra, the Jerusalem Symphony, the Haifa Orchestra. So by the time I got the position in Haifa, I had a good deal of experience. And also at Juilliard, I did study orchestral conducting with Jean Morel at the same time that I was studying choral conducting with Abraham Kaplan, a name that you know.
So, how would you say the choral scene in Israel has changed over the last 50 years? What's it like now?
Well, interestingly enough, the most significant advance in the choral music and the singing here is children's choirs. We now have a whole bunch of very, very almost professional type children's choirs. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a huge development in grown-up choirs for many reasons. First of all, unfortunately, in our school system, we do not have hardly any musical education going on. And with the budget cuts over the years, it's gotten less and less. And so when you don't have a student choir, and most of these kids did not sing in synagogue choirs either, the secret to all the success of the choirs in places like Germany and England is that these kids have been singing in choirs in schools and churches since they were children. And so the transition into singing into grown-up choirs was a natural one. Here we did not have that. And so many of the singers who would come to audition for these choirs did not even read music.
Hmm.
And so you had to build them from ground level, both with solfege lessons, with voice lessons. And even though the situation is better today, there are two or three professional choirs, the opera choir, Renat unfortunately no longer exists, but there are two or three other ensembles that are professional. The Jerusalem Academy Chamber Choir became professional in the 70s. And unfortunately, it was for that reason that the choir is now defunct, because the Academy got into very serious financial problems, and they insisted that the choir become an amateur choir. You can't go backwards. And so I refused, and I resigned from the Academy in 2022 mostly for that reason. Except for the couple of professional choirs, the non-professional choirs in Israel have not really advanced that much, unfortunately, and it's a shame. But it's for the reasons that I told you. There's no basis for young people here to sing. The young kids, the boys, for example, prefer to play football than to sing, and they see singing as something that the girls do. And if there were choirs in the schools, then they would have sung for sure, and they would have sought, in my opinion, to continue, because it's so much fun to sing, and so that's a basic problem in the Israeli education system,
As well as in America.
as well as America, I understand, and that's also a shocker for me,
Yeah.
and that's a shame, a real shame, because it's almost like in this age of ours of computers and cell phones that kids have stopped reading
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
or read so much less, and
Yeah.
I find that to be almost tragic, because those of us who read, it adds so much to your life, as let's say, as opposed to watching films, which is more passive. And when you read, your mind is working. And
Mhm.
so the fact that we don't have in the education system an emphasis on music, or enough on reading, or in general on culture. I mean, I can't believe that the young people that I speak with, most of them don't know who Bach was. And for me, that's an unbelievable loss for them. But I mean, for me, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And for example, in youth concerts that we were doing in Haifa, I was asked not to do any music that was more than 4 minutes long,
Mm.
because that was the attention span of these
Attention
kids,
span. Yeah.
the length of an MTV song.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Ah, what else? Tennis. You want to tell us something about your experiences as a tennis umpire,
Yeah, sure.
and how that may be in some ways similar to your experiences as a conductor? I know you talk about this in your book.
Yeah, well, it's similar in the fact that in most cases I was dealing with string instruments. Uh, Actually, to be serious about it, I played varsity tennis at Columbia College from 59 till 63. So what happened was that when I came to Israel, I didn't even know there was tennis here, but I did bring my racket and I went to play at the Hebrew University. And believe it or not, I found out there was a league, and I joined the league and played. I actually played for the YMCA club in Jerusalem. And my dad, who was a born again Orthodox Jew, when he came to visit me in Israel, said to me, I sent you to Israel, and I come to a concert and you're singing, you're conducting the Haydn Mass, and then I come to see a tennis match and you're playing for the Young Men's Christian Association. What did I send you to Israel for? And I said, Dad, don't worry about it, okay? So anyway, I was playing league tennis, and then tennis began to have a renaissance in Israel with players such as Shlomo Dickstein and Amos Mansdorf and Gilad Bloom and Shachar Perkis, all in the top 100 of the world, which is amazing for a small country like Israel. And so we started to have tournaments, and we had to bring in international umpires, and it was costly. And so they sent a couple of us old timers in our 30s. That was in 1984, actually. I was already 42. They sent us to Roland Garros in Paris to take the course to become international umpires so that we could serve Israeli tennis as umpires. And so I became an international umpire in 85. And believe it or not, I'm still an international umpire in 2024, the oldest one in the world by far.
Stanley, anything you'd like to add that we haven't touched on?
I haven't mentioned the fact that I became head of the choral conducting department in Israel, and in the Jerusalem Academy, and I started to teach mostly choral conducting, but also orchestral conducting, and I have 32 students who are now working full-time as professional conductors in Israel and all over the place, and I find that to be probably as satisfying as my conducting experiences, that I've managed to pass the baton, so to speak, over to the next generation. And actually, if you will permit me, I see you as one of those as well. And I'm so proud of the fact that the Boston Zamir has flourished over all these years because of you. And I'm not saying it because we're doing this interview together and because we're friends. I'm saying it because I have the greatest appreciation for your accomplishments in Boston, both musically and culturally throughout the city, and so that gives me tremendous satisfaction that you have done that in Boston, what I did in New York.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think you have left quite a legacy. Not that you're finished, but starting the Jewish choral movement in America, and then your teaching and concerts and your transformation of the choral scene in Israel. Fantastic.
Thank you, Josh.
So, Stanley, thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing all of this wonderful information.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you, and again, I enjoy your lectures and your interviews. You're kind enough to send them to me, and keep up the great work that you're doing in Boston. It keeps you young and keeps you vital, and it gives me a tremendous amount of nachat to see what you're doing.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Josh.